Naomi Benson wasn't the kind of woman who fell in love with illusions. But Marcus Olayemi wasn't just any man. He was a walking dream with nothing to his name but the kind of voice that made you believe the future had already arrived. They met in a small co-working space in Ikija, both renting cheap seats to build something from nothing. Naomi had just opened her boutique with 5 dresses and a prayer. Marcus was pitching his logistics app to anyone who'd listen, but no one did, except her. He spoke of vision, of partnership, of changing the world. Naomi listened, wide-eyed but grounded, moved not by fantasies but by his persistence. "You're going to do something big," she told him once after a pitch that had clearly gone nowhere. He laughed. "I just need someone who believes that, too." Without even knowing it, Naomi became that person. Their connection grew slowly. Marcus started showing up more, sometimes to borrow her printer, other times just to talk. They bonded over takeout and missed calls, failures and small wins. One night, as they sat on the steps outside the building eating suya and laughing about a client who ghosted them both, Marcus looked at her and said, "If I ever make it big, you'll be the reason why." Naomi didn't take it as romance, not yet, but something in her heart flickered. She wasn't used to being seen beyond her craft. He noticed things others didn't, like how her hands trembled when she sewed under pressure or how she hummed old Yoruba hymns when she was deep in thought. And when his rent ran late or his laptop crashed, she helped without being asked. "I believe in you, Marcus," she said one day, handing him money to fix his system. "Not because you've arrived, but because I know you will." She had no idea that those words would one day become both the blessing and the burden of her life. The first time Marcus needed help with branding, it was Naomi who stayed up till midnight designing his logo. Her boutique's orders were piling up, but she paused everything to help him create a visual identity that looked professional. She wasn't just offering encouragement anymore. She was doing the work. "Marcus, if you're pitching to real clients, your proposal can't look like it was typed in a bus," she said, eyes narrowed behind her laptop. He chuckled, leaning over her shoulder with his usual charm. "That's why I have you, babe." She didn't complain when he started using her printer daily, draining her ink. She didn't flinch when he asked for $15,000 to fix his data issues or $40,000 to cater for a meeting with potential investors. Each time she dipped into her boutique's savings, she convinced herself it was temporary, an investment in a man she believed would multiply the seed. The irony wasn't lost on her. While she was hand-beating wedding gowns for clients, she was also indirectly financing a business that might never call her its partner. But Naomi didn't think that way, not yet. When Marcus landed his first minor delivery contract, she celebrated like it was hers. "See why I told you not to give up?" she beamed, hugging him tightly. "It's only the beginning." He bought her shawarma that night, called her his good luck charm, and even promised that one day he'd put her name on a billboard beside his. But when his business needed a website, Naomi paid the developer. When his staff uniforms were delayed, Naomi's seamstress stayed back late to fix them, unpaid. Yet even when her boutique's rent neared expiration, she chose to renew it quietly and said nothing about the strain. "I just want to see you win, Marcus," she whispered one evening, staring at his head on her lap as he drifted to sleep. What she didn't see, though, was that while she was stitching pieces of his future together, Marcus had already begun to see himself as the finished product, independent of the hands that built him. It was during a dinner with 2 of Marcus's new business associates that Naomi first noticed the shift. They were seated at a rooftop lounge, the city lights below them, and the conversation flowed around Marcus like he belonged in a world far shinier than the one they'd built together. Naomi tried to offer her thoughts during a debate on branding strategy, but Marcus cut her off mid-sentence. "Let's leave this to the professionals, babe," he said lightly, nudging her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The laughter around the table stung like a slap. She sipped her drink, her throat tight, wondering when her opinion had become a footnote. The man who used to ask her for advice now looked embarrassed when she spoke. And when she told him later that his comment hurt, Marcus only shrugged. "I was just joking. Why are you always so sensitive?" The shift continued in subtler ways. Marcus began showing up late to their meetings, often claiming he was held up with the big boys. He corrected her speech in public, tiny, unnecessary things like how she pronounced logistics, or the way she used her cutlery. "You're too local sometimes," he said once, laughing as she stared at him in disbelief. In the past, she'd called it teasing, but now it felt like erosion. At a friend's engagement party, Naomi wore a dress she'd spent 2 nights making by hand, a rich emerald green with intricate beadwork. Marcus barely glanced at her. "You always do the most," he muttered under his breath. She smiled for the cameras, but her chest ached with quiet humiliation. That night, while removing her lashes in silence, Naomi stared at herself in the mirror and whispered, "He's changing." But deep down, she feared the truth. He wasn't changing. He was revealing. Naomi was at her boutique when Gloria, an old friend from university, dropped by unannounced. After a warm hug and compliments on the shop's new decor, Gloria hesitated before saying, "I saw Marcus the other day. At Red Orchid Hotel. He wasn't alone." Naomi paused mid-fold, her fingers freezing over a gown. "Was it a meeting?" she asked, voice calm but cold. Gloria shook her head, her voice lowering. "They were laughing too hard for business, Naomi." And she touched his chest when she said goodbye. Naomi nodded slowly, biting the inside of her cheek until the pain grounded her. She thanked Gloria and promised to handle it. That evening, when Marcus strolled in like nothing happened, Naomi confronted him. "Were you at Red Orchid with a woman?" He looked stunned, but only for a second. Then he rolled his eyes. "So now I can't even talk to clients?" The argument that followed wasn't loud, but it was brutal. Naomi listed the times she had noticed his phone face down, the late-night messages, the quick calls outside. Marcus accused her of being paranoid. "You're starting to act like all those clingy women," he said, shaking his head. "Is that what we've become?" Naomi stared at him, more confused than angry. How did concern become insecurity? She remembered the time she defended him, the sacrifices, the money she gave, the loyalty she offered without pause. But he offered no reassurance, only deflection. "You need to focus on the wedding," he said, dismissing her. "All this talk of cheating, it's exhausting." Naomi stood in the doorway, watching him walk away. Something in her heart trembled, not with rage, but realization. This man no longer feared losing her. And that, more than anything, was the first betrayal she could not ignore. Naomi started noticing the subtle pattern in Marcus's requests, each one framed as temporary, each one building on the last. "Just help me cover this weekend's dispatch fees. I'll pay you back by next week," he said one morning, slipping his hand around her waist like the affection was part of the payment. She nodded, transferred the funds, and reminded herself this was partnership, but the numbers didn't lie. Her boutique savings had dropped by nearly half in 6 months. Rent was paid, staff salaries were met, but every extra coin was going to Marcus's ever-growing list of emergencies. When she brought it up gently, he sighed like a tired parent. "Naomi, do you want a husband with nothing or a man who's building something? Choose one." She smiled weakly, but her silence was no longer rooted in understanding. It was now self-preservation. By the time wedding planning began, Naomi realized she had funded nearly every stage without being asked, because Marcus had learned he didn't have to. The venue deposit came from her boutique's account. The decoration budget? She paid it quietly after Marcus said the vendor was dragging feet. The catering invoice arrived with her name on it. She paid, no questions asked. Yet Marcus boasted to friends about handling things like a man. Naomi listened without flinching. In a fitting room with her assistant one afternoon, she reviewed a list of upcoming expenses. "Are these from our wedding planner or Marcus?" she asked. Her assistant replied, "All from your line, Mall processed as Naomi B. Enterprises." Something tightened in her chest. Even the event's branding carried her boutique's name, but nobody outside that small circle knew. Not even Marcus. Naomi didn't weep. She simply inhaled deeply and said, "Confirm every vendor has my name in the contract. Every single one." Naomi had always sensed the unease in Marcus's mother's eyes, but she told herself it was just generational distance. It became harder to deny when Mama Olayemi barely acknowledged her at family gatherings. Conversations excluded her. Jokes were made at her expense. "She's always quiet," Marcus's mother said once, sipping tea with a disdainful smirk. Like she's hiding something. These boutique girls ain't. You never know what they're really about. Naomi bit back her reply, forcing a smile. Marcus would later dismiss it as his mother being old school, urging Naomi to overlook it. You know how she is. She'll come around, he said, pressing a kiss to her cheek before returning to his phone. But the distance only widened. Whenever Tiana, supposedly a family friend, came around, Mama's smile brightened like a long-lost daughter had arrived. Naomi sat in the same room, invisible. It was a lunch on a humid Sunday that made Naomi finally question the dynamic. Marcus had just stepped out to take a call, and Naomi was left with Mama Olayemi and Tiana at the table. The older woman leaned forward and said, "You have nice hands, Naomi. You should focus on sewing. That's where your blessing is, not trying to marry above your level." Tiana chuckled, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Naomi sat upright. "I wasn't aware I was marrying above anything, Ma," she replied softly. "But thank you for the concern." The moment Marcus returned, the smiles returned too. Mama resumed chatting like nothing happened. That evening, Naomi asked him directly, "Do you notice how different she is when you're not around?" Marcus rolled his eyes. "It's just your imagination, Naomi. You need to stop overthinking everything." She didn't argue. But deep inside, she began learning that sometimes the deepest betrayals came wrapped in family, smiles, and traditions, and that not all mothers-in-law came to bless the union. Some came to break it silently. Naomi had always imagined the moment she'd show her fiancé the sketch of her wedding dress, a piece she'd dreamed about since childhood. It wasn't just a gown, it was a message. The design was elegant yet bold, a deep ivory satin with cascading hand-stitched petals, lace sleeves that mirrored strength, and a low back that spoke of quiet defiance. She worked on the design late into the night, her fingers aching but her heart fluttering. When it was ready, she walked into Marcus's living room, rolled out the sketch, and smiled. "I want your honest opinion. This is what I'll wear when I say yes to you." He looked up from his phone, scanned it briefly, and muttered, "Whatever makes you happy, just don't go overboard. Weddings are expensive enough." Then he returned to his screen, chuckling at a meme. Naomi stood frozen, her joy deflating like a balloon left too long in the sun. Later that night, as she hand-traced the bodice onto muslin, Naomi fought the sting in her chest. The man who once praised every stitch she made now regarded her dreams like a transaction. "You didn't even look," she said later, voice calm but brittle. Marcus glanced up, irritated. "Naomi, why are you acting like I said something bad? I said it looks fine." "You didn't say anything at all," she whispered. He sighed, grabbing his keys. "Babe, I have things to do. You know I'm stretched right now." And with that, he left. Naomi sat back on her work table, hands still, eyes glassy. Her assistant, Kemi, peeked in with tea. "Ma, should I adjust the lace pattern?" Naomi shook her head. "No, leave it as it is. Let it be exactly how I imagined." That night, she finished the first layer in silence, realizing for the first time that she might be the only one who cared how she showed up at her own wedding. Naomi had always been intuitive. She didn't jump to conclusions, nor did she believe every whispered warning. But when patterns start repeating themselves, soft knocks at the gate late at night, Tiana's perfume lingering in rooms she never entered, and Marcus whispering into his phone with the balcony door shut, even intuition becomes reality. One Tuesday afternoon, Naomi returned early from a vendor run and found Tiana seated on the living room floor with her shoes off, laughing with Marcus over a bowl of fried plantain. She smiled when Naomi walked in, but her gaze had the weight of intrusion. "Naomi," Marcus said, rising too quickly. "Tiana just dropped by with Suya from Abuja. Isn't that sweet?" Naomi smiled faintly and dropped her keys. "Yes, very thoughtful." Her voice was calm, but something in her chest tightened. The intimacy wasn't in the Suya. It was in the barefoot comfort, the inside jokes, and the way Tiana touched his shoulder like she had always belonged. That night, Naomi lay awake in bed while Marcus snored beside her. She stared at the ceiling, piecing together memories she had tried to dismiss. Tiana always arrived when Marcus was just stepping out. She never called first, she showed up, and Marcus never flinched. During a family dinner 2 weeks ago, Tiana had reached for Marcus's plate, picked out the onions, and said, He never liked these, remember? Naomi had paused mid-chew. How did she know that? Marcus had glanced at Naomi then, but said nothing. In the stillness of their bedroom, Naomi turned and whispered, "Is there something I should know?" Marcus stirred, barely awake. "You're overthinking again. Tiana is like family." Naomi swallowed hard. "Like blood, or like comfort?" He didn't respond. In that moment, Naomi stopped waiting for the truth. She had learned long ago that betrayal often came smiling, and that silence sometimes screamed louder than confessions. She reached for her phone under the pillow, opened a new note, and began typing. "Watch the hands that don't flinch in the fire. They're used to lying." It started with a missing receipt. Naomi was trying to trace an overcharge from the makeup vendor when she noticed the payment had gone through under Benson Enterprises. Curious, she pulled up her full expense sheet, and what she saw made her hands go cold. Every invoice, every vendor, every stage decoration, photographer, lighting, hall deposit, and even the DJ, all contracts had her boutique's name listed as the primary funder. The bank transfers were direct. Her signature was on the approvals. She stared at the spreadsheet on her laptop, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the realization that while Marcus stood at center stage, receiving applause and admiration, she was the invisible hand holding the weight of it all. Her boutique, her sweat, her sacrifices. And no one knew, not even the people she was paying. She called the decorator, pretending to confirm flower choices, then casually asked, "Whose name is on the payment confirmation?" "Ah, Madame Naomi. Yours na. We don't do anything without your green light-o," the woman replied cheerfully. Naomi ended the call and closed her laptop slowly. She sat back in her chair, her fingers trembling slightly. Her boutique assistant, Kemi, noticed the tension. "Ma, is something wrong?" Naomi blinked at her, then shook her head. "Nothing that hasn't been wrong for a while." That night, she didn't sleep. She brought out every receipt, sorted them by category, and stacked them in a binder. The more she compiled, the more detached she became. The dressmaker, the caterer, even the sound technician, all paid through her boutique. "He doesn't even know who controls the lights," she whispered to herself. She picked up her phone and texted her lawyer. "I need to revisit the wedding contracts. Quietly. Tomorrow." Then she leaned back and stared at the wall, her heart no longer breaking, just hardening. It happened at a dinner Marcus hosted for his friends, a final send-off before the wedding week. The restaurant was dimly lit, the table filled with laughter and wine, and Naomi sat quietly beside him, listening to the loud clinks of glasses and the overused jokes. Then one of Marcus's friends, Cunley, raised his cup and said, "To Marcus, the sharpest guy I know. From nothing to something. And let's not lie, he had options, but at least he's marrying someone safe." Laughter erupted. Naomi didn't. She looked at Marcus, waiting for him to correct the comment. Instead, he grinned. "Nami try, Abby," he said, taking a sip. Her heart pounded in her ears, her cheeks burned, but her face remained neutral. She turned to Cunley and asked softly, "Safe? Is that your idea of love?" The table quieted. Cunley looked surprised. "No offense, Ma, I meant like, you're not problematic. Not like those high-maintenance babes." Naomi nodded slowly, her hands in her lap. "Ah, so that's my superpower, being easy to ignore." Later that night, in the privacy of their car, she sat beside Marcus in silence. He glanced at her. "You're quiet." She didn't respond. "Naomi, don't tell me you're upset over what Cunley said. You know how guys talk," he added, laughing under his breath. She turned to him. "And how do you talk when I'm not there?" Marcus sighed. "This is why I didn't want you at that dinner. You're too sensitive sometimes." Naomi reached for her clutch. "I wasn't sensitive. I was silent. That's not the same thing." He parked outside their apartment, unbuckled his seatbelt, and said, "We're getting married in a few days. Can we just enjoy this week without drama?" She smiled tightly. "Sure, I'll be the background character in your big story." The next morning, Naomi arrived at her lawyer's office before sunrise. As the receptionist opened the gate, she said, "I want all the vendor rights under my name. Every stage, every flower, every tablecloth. We're not postponing, but we're rewriting who owns the stage." Her voice was steady, and her silence, the kind that once gave Marcus comfort, had now become her most dangerous weapon. Naomi sat across from barrister Odu, a quiet, sharp-eyed man in his mid-50s who had represented her boutique in property matters before. His office smelled faintly of old leather and eucalyptus polish. He flipped through the contract copies she handed over, one by one, his brow arching just slightly. "You processed all of these under your business account?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "I didn't realize how many until last week." The lawyer leaned back. "You want to amend the legal standing, shift all vendor agreements and intellectual rights under a formal name. Yours." Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "Yes, everything, not just in name but in execution. Every vendor must acknowledge that I am the financier and final authority." Quietly, Odu folded his hands, pausing. "That can be done, but you do realize it means you own the event." Naomi gave a faint smile. "I always did. I'm just tired of hiding the receipt." The process took 3 days. Contracts were revised, fresh clauses inserted, and every vendor re-signed under Naomi B. Holdings, the legal shell created that week. Nothing changed visibly. The dressmaker still sewed, the decorator still hung flowers, but now all payments were routed through Naomi's accounts directly, with signatures confirming her control. Vendors were told there had been an internal restructure, and most didn't question it. "Madam, as long as money drops, I sign," the caterer said with a shrug. Even the DJ, who'd once tagged Marcus in a thank you boss post, now updated his invoice with Naomi's initials. Marcus remained unaware, proudly posting pictures of the wedding cake tasting and pre-wedding shoot, calling himself a man who builds without handouts. Naomi said nothing. At the boutique, Kemi noticed her sudden calm. "Ma, are you okay? You've been too quiet." Naomi smiled without lifting her eyes from her laptop. "I've just learned to let people write their stories, then own the copyright." At night, she sat alone in her studio sketching, watching as the silence in her heart grew louder, not from pain, but preparation. It came at 1:43 a.m., a message meant for someone else. Naomi was folding freshly delivered fabrics when her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She picked it up casually, thinking it might be a late client or a vendor check-in. But it was from Tiana. The message read, "Let him handle her gently until the wedding is done. We'll make sure she's out of the picture soon." Almost there. Naomi didn't move. Her thumb hovered over the screen, the glow painting her expression in ice. She read it again, not for clarity, but to let the betrayal sink deep into her bones. She didn't reply. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She locked the screen and placed the phone down slowly, as if any sudden movement would release something inside her she wasn't ready to face. The weight of the betrayal wasn't in the words, it was in the timing. They had already planned her disappearance before she'd even said, "I do." For a full hour she sat in the boutique in complete silence, the overhead bulb humming faintly. Then she rose, pulled out a locked drawer, and retrieved a velvet folder she'd kept for months, filled with backup contracts, ownership deeds, even recordings of conversations that proved her financial backing. Naomi placed Tiana's message on the very top, screenshotting it before deleting it from her phone. She wasn't going to confront Marcus. There was no point in demanding explanations from a man who had already sold the script to someone else. Instead, she tightened the structure beneath her quiet vengeance. She sent her lawyer a text. "Add Tiana's name to the restricted list for the event. No access without my clearance. No exceptions." When he replied understood, Naomi exhaled. Kemi walked in groggily, surprised to find Naomi still awake. "Ma, you're still here?" Naomi looked up with a calmness that didn't match the storm behind her eyes. Some nights are meant for rearranging furniture. In futures. That night she didn't sleep. She rewrote the entire guest list and marked the exact time her silence would end, not with a scream, but with a microphone. Wasn't the reason it sparkled, Tiana was. She saw it in the way the girls giggled when she entered, the polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Naomi arrived in a minimalist gown she designed herself, bone white with silver trimming, a bold high slit. But instead of admiration, she was met with condescending praise. "You look modest," one cousin said, sipping from a straw. "That's what makes you different, Naomi," another chimed in. "You're not flashy. That's why Marcus chose you. You're the kind of woman a man can mold." Naomi smiled tightly, sipping her champagne. "Is that so?" she asked, letting the bitter bubbles settle on her tongue. "Then I hope the mold holds when the fire comes." Later, during the gift opening, one of the aunties said loudly, "Ah, you're very lucky, my dear. Men like Marcus don't come around twice. Handsome, ambitious, and patient. You must be very humble for him to settle." Naomi paused mid-unwrapping and looked up. The word settle hung in the air like poison. Her voice was gentle when she said, "Yes, I'm lucky. But I think Marcus is luckier. Not every woman knows how to carry a man's dreams and make them stand upright." A few women chuckled uncomfortably. One tried to pivot the mood with a toast, but the air had shifted. Naomi's words weren't loud, but they hit hard. On her way to the car, a bridesmaid pulled her aside. "Naomi, are you okay?" Naomi turned to her, her smile soft but tired. "They keep calling me lucky, like didn't build the house they're celebrating in." The bridesmaid blinked. "What do you mean?" Naomi opened the car door and replied, "It means I've decided to let them keep their illusion, till I rearrange the entire scene." As the door shut, she glanced at her reflection in the tinted glass. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't sad. She was just sharpening. The boutique was quiet that Sunday evening, the hum of the industrial sewing machine the only sound breaking the silence. Naomi had locked the doors early and told Kemi to take the next day off. She needed solitude, not for work but for war. Laid across the cutting table was a length of blood-red silk she had been saving for a custom order. But tonight, it would be transformed. Naomi had drawn the design weeks ago, long before her mind accepted the truth, but now her hands worked with certainty. This wasn't just a dress, it was an exclamation. Deep red, a color too bold for tradition, too loud for shame. She stitched with quiet fury, weaving strength into every seam. The neckline was dramatic, the waist cinched like armor, and the train, long enough to remind every eye in the room who truly owned the stage. She wasn't sewing for a wedding. She was sewing for a rebirth. Around midnight, she paused to wipe sweat from her brow, staring at the gown on the mannequin. The overhead light cast shadows that made the red shimmer like fire. She touched the fabric softly and whispered, "They think this story ends at the altar." Then she returned to her seat and resumed beating the bodice, intricate silver vines crawling across the silk like roots reclaiming soil. As she worked, memories of every silent dismissal came back. The sideways looks, the passive insults, the empty reassurances. They had tried to shape her into a version that suited their comfort, modest, agreeable, invisible. But she had never belonged in their box. She was the one who funded the celebration. She was the reason there was even an event to mock. The red silk was her declaration. She would no longer shrink to fit their narrative. She would arrive not begging, not apologizing, but blazing. When the final stitch was knotted and the dress stood ready, Naomi turned off the light and whispered into the darkness, "They will never forget the woman they tried to overlook." The next family gathering was held at Marcus's uncle's house, a pre-wedding celebration filled with relatives Naomi barely knew. She had planned to skip it but changed her mind last minute, choosing to attend not for courtesy, but for clarity. The moment she walked in, Tiana was already holding court, standing beside Marcus like a co-host, handing out drinks and laughing too loudly. She wore a fitted Ankara dress and bright gold earrings, her hair braided back in a style Naomi recognized from an old Facebook photo tagged, "Back home again." Marcus introduced her casually. "You know my cousin from London, right?" "Tiana." Naomi raised her brows slightly and responded, "Yes. The cousin who knows how you take your coffee. The cousin who whispers into your phone at 1 a.m. Marcus shifted awkwardly, chuckling, "You're being dramatic, Naomi." But Tiana didn't flinch. She simply smirked, as if unbothered, as if the game had already been won. Later that evening, Naomi found herself watching them from across the compound. Tiana leaned into Marcus when she spoke, her hand resting on his arm in a way that was too familiar. Aunties watched them with approval, whispering things Naomi couldn't hear but already understood. Her position was being diluted, redefined. One relative approached her and said, "You're very lucky. If he had married his cousin, the wedding would have been even bigger." Naomi smiled politely and replied, "Yes, lucky indeed. Sometimes the rejected stone funds the entire building." The woman blinked, confused, and walked away. Naomi took a quiet walk around the compound and opened her phone to a private group chat she had created weeks ago with her lawyer and her personal assistant. She typed, "Tiana is not family. I want her name removed from the guest list, catering list, and rehearsal walkthrough. If anyone asks why, tell them the bride's decision is final." She clicked send and exhaled. If they wanted to play games, they would now learn what it meant to underestimate a woman who builds in silence but strikes with clarity. Marcus had begun documenting every stage of the wedding on social media like a man who had constructed his empire with bare hands. His captions were always drenched in self-praise. A man who stayed focused. A man who didn't give up. A man building from scratch. Naomi watched quietly from her boutique office, scrolling through the comments on his latest post. A picture of him standing beside the event planner. "Boss moves, self-made, God did," she all laughed. The backdrop behind him, which read, "Olayemi Forever," had been funded through her boutique's advertising budget. Her logo strategically removed. Every like, every flame emoji, every God when. Comment celebrated a man who had built an illusion on her resources. Kemi entered the office with a folder and caught a glimpse of Naomi's phone screen. He's trending again. Naomi locked her phone and replied, "He's allowed to enjoy the lights. It won't stop what's coming." She didn't respond to his posts. She didn't like them. She didn't even send a private message. But she made one quiet move. She emailed the event photographer directly. "Hi Remy, kindly ensure that all final photo rights are licensed to Naomi B. Holdings. No external use permitted without written approval." Within minutes, she received confirmation. She then scheduled a post from her business page for the day of the wedding, a subtle yet firm announcement. "Proud sponsor of the design, structure, and logistics of the Olayemi wedding. All rights reserved, no photos. No names, just branding." Kemi glanced at it and whispered, "Savage." Naomi smiled, strategic. As Marcus soaked in attention from followers who saw him as an example of male ambition, Naomi stood calmly in the shadows, not out of weakness, but because that was where the real work happened. They didn't know that the bride had long stopped waiting to be celebrated. She was now orchestrating something far greater than applause. A reckoning dressed in red silk. Naomi sat in the conference room of her lawyer's office, the polished wooden table before her covered in neatly labeled folders. Barrister Odu adjusted his glasses as he handed her the final document. "Everything has been reviewed," he said. "All vendor agreements are now legally registered under Naomi B. Holdings. The legal transfer of ownership for services, catering, decor, venue, sound, photography is complete." Naomi flipped through the pages without flinching. The name Marcus Olayemi was absent from every line of authority. "No exceptions?" she asked. Odu shook his head. "None. Even the stage lighting and imported wine, all paid under your company account. He has no financial contribution documented." Naomi leaned back, her voice even. "Good. I don't want him claiming legacy on something he never funded." She signed the bottom of the final agreement, her name sharp and elegant. "The world thinks he's the groom leading an empire," she murmured. "They don't know he's just been dancing on a stage someone else paid for." After the meeting, Naomi walked down the corridor with a strange calmness blooming inside her. Not happiness, just clarity. At her boutique later that day, she pulled out her personal journal and listed every expense Marcus had verbally claimed as his. The customized dance floor, the imported champagne, the sound technician who tagged him as a visionary client. All of it hers. Kemi watched her silently for a moment before asking, "Ma, why don't you just cancel the wedding?" Naomi paused, pen hovering. "Because a cancellation would make it about him. I want the silence to be loud enough to make the floor shake under their feet." That night, Naomi sent one final email to the event anchor. "All audio, light cues, and transitions are to follow my private directive. Do not begin the reception until my representative gives the signal." The MC replied, "Understood. Just send the cue." Naomi didn't smile. She just saved the thread and locked her phone. Power didn't always come with a microphone or applause. Sometimes it came dressed as a calm woman who had already signed every check before the music ever played. The morning of the wedding rehearsal, Naomi received a call from the event coordinator. "Hi, Madam Naomi. Just confirming, you'll be in the third car, yes? The traditional lead cars are reserved for the groom, the mother, and the honored guest. Naomi's voice didn't waver. I beg your pardon. The third car. The planner fumbled. Ah, yes, sorry. It's the arrangement Mr. Marcus approved. He said it's family protocol. You know, the front row is for certain roles. Naomi's silence on the other end was steel. Make no changes for now, she said quietly. She ended the call and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Behind her, the red silk gown she'd hung days ago swayed slightly in the breeze. The symbolism hit hard. The woman who funded the entire affair was being asked to ride in the shadow of her own ceremony. She picked up her phone and forwarded the entire call transcript to Barrister Odu with a short message. Let them proceed. Do not interfere yet. We will respond at the venue. When she arrived at the venue for the rehearsal later that afternoon, she noticed the convoy list neatly printed and pinned to the coordination board. Marcus was in the lead car with Tiana listed as event liaison. Naomi read it, blinked once, and walked past. When Marcus spotted her, he jogged over, adjusting his agbada with practiced flair. Babe, you saw the convoy? Just tradition-o. Don't mind the politics. You'll still shine, I swear. Naomi looked at him blankly. You said Tiana is family. Since when do cousins manage wedding logistics? He laughed nervously. Babe, don't start. She's just helping. In the convoy setup, it's symbolic. It doesn't mean anything. Naomi tilted her head. Symbolism matters to people who are pretending. Then she turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. In her mind, the pieces were already rearranging. She wouldn't protest. She wouldn't beg to be moved forward. No. She would sit in the back and let the driver take a different turn when no one expected it. After all, it's not where you sit that matters. It's who owns the road. The wedding day dawned with gold streaks stretching across the sky like a quiet warning. Naomi sat in the back seat of the black SUV, hands folded in her lap, her red silk gown cascading across the leather like liquid fire. The driver adjusted the mirror and cleared his throat. Ma, are we following the convoy directly? She looked up at him, her voice steady. Stay in formation, but when I give the signal, we'll take the alternate route. Do not question it. He nodded slowly, recognizing the quiet authority in her voice. Outside the window, the other cars began pulling out of the compound, horn honks, cheers, and laughter from the groomsmen in the lead vehicle. Naomi remained silent. Behind her, another black SUV tailed them. Inside it sat Barrister Odu, holding a leather briefcase filled with documentation and vendor authorizations. She didn't need an entourage. She needed precision. As the convoy turned into the street, Naomi's mind wandered briefly to her father, long deceased, who once told her, "Silence is not weakness, my daughter. It is a blade that cuts deepest when unsheathed at the right moment." Her phone buzzed. It was Kemi. Everything in place. Microphone will be delivered to Odu at cue time, MC aware. Naomi replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji, then placed her phone beside her. She stared out the window, watching as children danced barefoot by the roadside, waving at the passing cars. The world believed this was the happiest day of her life. In many ways it was, just not for the reason they imagined. She wasn't arriving to marry a man. She was arriving to end a performance. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tiny golden stopwatch. When the car paused at a traffic light, she pressed the button. The countdown had begun. And in her silence, the storm approached, not with thunder, but with control. The music swelled as the guests settled into the white gold chairs, lined in elegant symmetry. Champagne flutes clinked. The MC, dressed in a sharp velvet blazer, adjusted his mic with practiced ease and smiled as the wedding coordinator gave him the cue. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we welcome you to the union of Marcus Olayemi and Naomi Benson." Applause followed, some guests already reaching for their phones to begin live streaming. Marcus stood proudly near the altar, surrounded by his groomsmen, basking in the attention. He kept glancing at the aisle, waiting for Naomi's procession. Behind the scenes, coordinators whispered to each other. The bride was not yet in the hall. "Delay?" one asked. "Maybe nerves," another guessed. Meanwhile, behind the venue, a small unmarked vehicle pulled up discreetly. Barrister Odu stepped out, holding the leather briefcase. He nodded to the sound technician, who silently handed him a second microphone, connected to the venue's master channel. Then, without any fanfare, he walked toward the center of the stage. The MC paused, confused, as Odu gestured for the mic. "Please," the lawyer said calmly. "I will be brief." Marcus, annoyed, frowned. "What's going on?" he asked the coordinator. The guests murmured, some leaning forward. Odu opened the briefcase, pulled out a crisp document, and spoke into the mic with the coolness of a man carrying a sword wrapped in legal velvet. "This is a public announcement made under the authority of the lead financier and event owner, Naomi B. Holdings. Effective immediately, all vendor services including catering, decoration, music, media, and venue rental are instructed to suspend operations. This event is canceled." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. People looked around in disbelief. "What kind of joke is this?" someone asked. A guest began to laugh, until the event lighting dimmed, the music shut off, and the catering staff began removing trays from the tables. Vendors started packing with robotic precision. The floral arch at the altar was dismantled mid-photograph. Marcus lunged forward. "Stop this nonsense." "Who gave you the right?" Odu turned calmly. "Your bride did, and she owns every inch of this moment except you." Then he stepped aside and waited. A storm had been unleashed, and the eye of it was just arriving. Marcus pushed through the confusion, shouting orders like a man grasping for authority that had quietly slipped through his fingers. "Don't stop anything!" "Keep playing the music. Somebody fix this." But the DJ had already shut down his booth, the photographer was packing his gear, and even the wedding planner was avoiding his eyes. "Sir, we were instructed legally," the head caterer said, holding up a contract. "Naomi B. Holdings is listed here. Everything belongs to her." A chair screeched backward. An auntie's head wrap tilted as she leaned in to whisper, "Wait, did the bride just cancel her own wedding?" Guests stood in pockets, phones raised, videos already uploading. The confusion gave way to whispers, and whispers began turning into questions. At the far end of the hall, the banner that once read "Forever Begins Today" was already being rolled up. Marcus turned to his best man. "Call Naomi. Find her. Fix this." But the man only shook his head and stepped away, slowly removing the boutonniere from his chest. Loyalty had vanished with the music. Then the air shifted. The heavy glass doors at the back of the hall opened, and all heads turned. Naomi entered with the stride of someone who had nothing to prove, only truths to deliver. Her red silk gown shimmered like fire beneath the remaining lights. Her face was calm, her posture unshakable. No bridesmaids, no flowers, just a woman reclaiming her own moment. Guests gasped. Some clapped, others simply stood still, mouths ajar. Naomi didn't look at the crowd. She walked straight toward the center of the chaos, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. Marcus froze. "Naomi," he said, half in relief, half in terror. She stopped 3 steps from him. "You wanted a performance," she said, her voice clear, every syllable slicing the air. "Now you've got one." She looked around, then back at him. "I paid for this day. From the lights above your head to the food your mother's chewing. This was never our wedding. It was mine. And I'm ending it on my terms." Cameras flashed. Guests recorded. And Marcus, the man who once dreamed of being seen, now wished only to disappear. For a moment, the silence in the room was absolute. Then the whispers began to rise, thick and fast like a growing tide. She paid for the whole thing. "Wait, is that true? Where's the groom's family in all of this?" Someone in the back exclaimed, "Check Instagram. It's already trending." Naomi stood unfazed as the noise built around her. Every eye in the room had shifted, not in pity, but awe. The crowd wasn't watching a meltdown. They were witnessing a revelation. One elderly woman dabbed at her eyes and whispered to her daughter. She didn't walk away crying. She walked in choosing. Naomi turned slightly and addressed the audience. "To everyone here who thought this was Marcus's celebration, I understand. He curated the illusion well, but I have the receipts. And now I have the final word." She nodded once toward the vendors still packing. "Continue. Wrap everything up." His staff obeyed without hesitation. Marcus's mother stormed forward, her wrapper swishing against the floor. "You disgrace us like this? In front of our people?" Naomi met her with a look so calm it burned. "Disgrace came the moment your son believed he could marry me with borrowed pride and empty hands. simply removed the curtain. Gasps followed. A guest shouted, "This is legendary." Naomi ignored them. Her eyes never left Marcus. "You lied to me. You took from me. And you stood in rooms that I paid for like you owned them." Marcus took a step forward, his voice cracking. "Naomi, please." But she raised a hand. "No, this wasn't a partnership. It was a performance. And you were just another actor trying to steal the script." Then she walked past him slowly, her gown trailing like a flame, her silence more powerful than any scream. Behind her, the hall continued to empty. Chairs were folded, lights dimmed. Guests spilled outside, replaying what they had just seen. And in the center of it all stood Marcus, still dressed like a groom, but no longer part of the ceremony. The bride had taken the wedding and rewritten the ending. Naomi's steps echoed with precision as she crossed the now silent hall, her red silk gown trailing behind her like a banner of victory. The fabric glistened under the dying lights, hugging her figure like it had been poured directly onto her skin. Every fold, every stitch was deliberate, not a costume, but a declaration. Her face held no smugness, no anger, just truth. Tiana, who had been standing near the cake table, stiffened when Naomi approached. Guests instinctively parted for her, their murmurs turning into reverent hushes. Some stood with phones raised, capturing the image of a bride who walked into her own wedding, not to be celebrated, but to reclaim her identity. Naomi's earrings glittered like armor, her gaze cutting sharper than any insult that had ever been whispered behind her back. Tiana stepped forward, trying to feign composure. "You're really making a scene in that." Naomi cut her off with a look that stopped time. "Funny. You wore lipstick for a wedding you thought was yours to inherit." Marcus approached, flustered, his voice hoarse. "Naomi, you don't have to do this. Just come backstage with me, let's talk." Naomi turned slowly. "Talk? After you put me in the back seat of a wedding I paid for. After you let them parade your mistress through rehearsal halls while calling her family?" Her voice never rose, but the weight of her words was enough to silence everyone. "This," she continued, gesturing to her dress, "is not a scene. It's the final stitch." Marcus reached for her arm, but she pulled away. "You don't touch what you didn't help build." And with that, Naomi ascended the stage not to speak, not to plead, but to stand tall in the silence she had once endured. The cameras didn't blink. Neither did she. Marcus followed Naomi to the foot of the stage, his hands trembling as he tried to regain control. "You don't understand," he said, his voice a notch above desperation. "I was under pressure, my family, the image. I just wanted to make it look like I had it all together." Naomi looked down at him, her chin slightly raised. "You wanted to look like a man. You didn't want to be one." Her words landed with brutal precision. "You once told someone I contributed nothing, not emotionally, not financially. But I contributed everything. I carried your ambition when no one else saw it. I silenced my doubts, emptied my accounts, and even wore shame like perfume to keep your image polished." Marcus's mouth opened, but no words came. "You didn't marry a woman," Naomi added. "You tried to rent a reputation." A gasp spread through the room. No one dared interrupt. Naomi stepped down, walking slowly toward Marcus. Her heels clicked sharply against the tiles. "This entire wedding was proof that I believed in us. But you believed in impressions." She pulled out a rolled document from her clutch, the final expense sheet signed by every vendor. "Since you like receipts, here's one. Line by line, item by item, paid by me." She handed it to him. He looked down at the paper with trembling hands, lips parting in disbelief. "Naomi, please, this isn't what I meant." She leaned closer, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "You meant to humiliate me quietly. You meant to remove me gently. But I decided to exit with the same elegance I entered, bold, composed, and unforgettable." She stepped back and turned toward the guests. "If anyone still wonders who Naomi Benson is, this is your answer. I am not someone's quiet blessing. I am the woman who paid for her own wedding and chose not to gift it away." Applause started. Then it grew. Some stood, some cried, and Marcus? He simply sank into the nearest chair, holding a paper heavier than gold. Tiana pushed past the confused guests and stormed toward Naomi. "You're so dramatic. You think this makes you powerful? You're just bitter that he chose me emotionally, even if you had the money." Naomi turned to face her fully, her red gown sweeping as she moved. "Chose you," she said, her voice silk and ice all at once. "You were never chosen. You were convenient. You slithered in through open cracks and called yourself a prize. But let me make something clear. If he had truly chosen you, I wouldn't have needed to pay for the altar." Tiana's face flushed with rage. "You're pathetic. You think this little show changes anything?" Naomi took a step closer, unshaken. "It changes everything. Because the moment a woman stops begging to be valued, the people clinging to her shine get exposed for the shadows they are." Security had already been instructed. At Naomi's nod, 2 men in black suits walked forward. "Escort her out," Naomi said simply. Tiana's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." One guard responded calmly, "Bride's instruction. You're no longer permitted in this space." Tiana turned to Marcus, expecting him to defend her. "Say something. Are you going to let them drag me out?" But Marcus, still seated with the document in his hand, looked up slowly. "I never asked for any of this," he muttered. "You just showed up." Tiana stared at him like he'd just slapped her. "So I was just nothing," Naomi interjected gently. "No, you were something. A mirror. You showed him exactly who he was becoming, and now he can't look anymore." The security guards took Tiana's arms, not roughly, but firmly. She tried to resist, but the crowd was already turning away. Eyes followed Naomi now, not Tiana. And as the doors closed behind the self-proclaimed cousin, Naomi exhaled deeply. The infestation had been removed. The hall had been emptied of pretense. And for the first time since it all began, the space belonged to her again, not through ownership, but through truth. The hall was quieter now, not with absence but awareness. Naomi turned as Marcus's mother approached, her wrapper tightly knotted, her brows pulled low in righteous fury. "So this is the shame you've brought to our name," she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is how you repay a family that accepted you." Naomi didn't flinch. "Accepted me?" she asked softly, raising an envelope she had retrieved from her assistant moments earlier. "Let's talk about acceptance, Mama." She handed the envelope to the older woman, who opened it with shaking fingers. Inside were receipts, dozens of them, fabric for AfircantalebyOBU, caterers for the groom's side, hotel reservations, hair and makeup packages Naomi had paid for, without a word. "You wore my generosity," Naomi continued, and then turned around to question my worth. The mother's face paled as she shuffled through the evidence, her lips parting in shock. "I didn't ask for all this," she snapped, suddenly defensive. Naomi's eyes met hers, cool and unwavering. "No, you didn't. But you accepted it. And you allowed others to treat me like I was beneath you, while standing in gowns I paid for." Guests stood frozen, watching the matriarch unravel. "You could have talked to me privately," she muttered, crumpling a paper in her hand. Naomi stepped closer. "But you never listened privately. So I spoke publicly." The air in the room shifted again, a subtle turning of the tide. Some aunties looked away, ashamed. Others exchanged glances, slowly realizing the cost of the narrative they had chosen to uphold. "Today wasn't about exposing you," Naomi added. "It was about freeing myself from the lie that silence is respect." She turned to walk away, but not before offering one final look. "You wanted tradition? Then accept this part too, the bride deciding who sits at her table and who doesn't." As Naomi left the woman standing speechless, with her silence wrapped around her like a cloak, the room finally understood. This bride had not come to be adorned. She had come to correct. As Naomi made her way toward the exit, her heels tapped rhythmically against the marble floor, each step more commanding than the last. The red gown trailed behind her like a final statement, untouchable, undefeated. She walked with no need to glance back, but the room couldn't stop watching her. Guests parted instinctively, making way without being asked. There were no bridesmaids to lead her, no groomsmen to frame her, just Naomi unescorted but not alone. Someone began to clap, a single person at first, then another, and then more. Applause built steadily as phones recorded, not for gossip, but for history. They weren't documenting a scandal anymore, they were capturing a transformation. The woman who had once been written off as quiet had become the embodiment of control, elegance, and poetic justice. Kemi stood at the far end of the hall, eyes glistening with admiration. As Naomi approached, she held out a soft shawl for her. "You did it," she whispered. Naomi nodded, her voice even. No, I revealed it. They just didn't expect me to carry the ending too. Marcus, still seated near the dismantled altar, watched her walk past without once meeting his eyes. The silence between them spoke volumes. A closing curtain, a door gently locked. Naomi, he said, barely above a whisper. She paused, just for a breath, then looked over her shoulder. You had everything, she said, and you gave it away for applause that ended before the music did. Then she stepped outside. The sun had begun to set, casting golden streaks across the compound. It was warm, gentle, a strange contrast to the storm that had just passed. Naomi inhaled deeply, raised her chin, and walked to the waiting car. Not because she was escaping, but because her time in the shadows was over, and the road ahead was finally hers. By evening, the wedding that never was had become the story that wouldn't rest. Videos flooded social media, Naomi's entrance, her confrontation, the red dress, the lawyer's declaration. Hashtags soared, the backseat bride, red silk revolution, she owns it all. Comments ranged from shock to standing ovations. This isn't just a wedding, it's a masterclass in dignity. She didn't break down, she broke through. Women everywhere needed to see this. And then, among the viral clips, someone uploaded a side-by-side comparison. Marcus bragging online about being a self-made man versus Naomi signing vendor checks in silence. The contrast was damning. Marcus's followers dropped. Naomi's boutique account exploded. Orders poured in. DMs flooded. Media houses sent interview requests. But Naomi didn't respond. She didn't post. She let the truth do the talking. At the boutique, Kemi showed her the analytics. You're trending in 6 countries. I've had to pause pre-orders. We're booked out till next quarter. Naomi set down her tea. Let them wait. Real craftsmanship takes time. Her voice wasn't triumphant, it was steady. Not every victory comes with champagne. Some arrive quietly, wrapped in scar tissue and red silk. Marcus tried to make a call. She declined. He sent a message. Can we talk, even if it's not about us? Naomi stared at the text for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. There was nothing left to say to a man who only saw her value after it was applauded. That night, she stood by her office window, watching the city lights flicker like stars rising from asphalt. She wasn't trending because she fought back. She was trending because she endured, and then ended the cycle on her own terms. The internet called her bold, but Naomi? She knew better. She wasn't bold. She was just finally seen. 2 weeks later, Naomi unlocked the doors to her boutique with a steady hand and a full heart. The bell above the entrance chimed softly, but this time the sound didn't echo through an empty room. It was followed by the hush of anticipation. Outside, a line of customers wrapped around the block, some holding printed screenshots of her red gown, others just wanting to shake her hand. The showroom was spotless, glowing with fresh lighting and quiet elegance. On the central mannequin stood a replica of the red silk dress, not for sale, but for story. Beside it, a placard read, "She walked away, not because she was broken, but because she remembered she was whole." Kemi stood by the counter, overwhelmed by the attention, but beaming with pride. "Ma, our appointment list is full till next April. Vogue Nigeria just requested an exclusive." Naomi adjusted a sleeve on the mannequin and replied, "Tell them they can wait. Let's focus on the women already standing in line." Later that afternoon, a young bride-to-be entered the boutique quietly, holding a crumpled piece of paper with a drawing. She approached Naomi directly. "I know you don't take custom orders anymore, but I sketched this when I saw your story. It made me believe I could choose myself too." Naomi took the paper gently. The design was simple but full of emotion. A soft emerald gown with bold shoulders and a high slit. Strength and vulnerability sewn into fabric. Naomi studied it, then looked up. "What's your name?" "Ozioma," the woman whispered. Naomi smiled. "Ozioma. Let's make this together. Not because of what they did to you, but because of who you're becoming." The woman burst into tears, and Naomi stepped around the counter to embrace her. In that moment, the boutique was no longer just a business. It had become a haven, a space where women came not only to dress their bodies, but to reclaim their stories. And as the sewing machines hummed in the background, Naomi knew that she hadn't just survived her wedding day. She had stitched something stronger in its place, a legacy dressed in truth. The morning was soft with sunlight, the city still stretching itself awake, when Naomi settled into her chair by the wide glass window of her office. The boutique below was bustling, but up here it was peaceful. Her tea steamed gently in a white porcelain cup. Across the desk lay a stack of client profiles, not celebrities, not influencers, just everyday women walking into their power. Naomi had stopped asking for visibility. She no longer needed it. A voice note played on her phone, a bride-to-be saying thank you for the courage she gave her to leave a toxic engagement. Another message followed, a mother of two who said the red dress had helped her finally file for divorce. Naomi didn't reply to them all, but she listened. And each story reminded her that her silence had never been weakness. It had only been waiting for the right time to roar. Kemi entered quietly, setting down a small package. "This came for you," she said. Naomi opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph, one taken during the wedding, printed on matte canvas. It showed Naomi walking out of the hall, her back turned, head held high, her red dress glowing beneath the sun. No caption, no sender, just the moment. Naomi stared at it for a long time, then placed it on the shelf beside her desk. "Perfect," she whispered. She leaned back in her chair, staring out at the skyline. The world hadn't ended when she walked away. It had begun. Her name was no longer tied to Marcus. She wasn't the woman someone left behind. She was the woman who left on her own terms, who funded the wedding not for love, but for closure. She sipped her tea slowly, peace running through her like a quiet river. She hadn't just walked out of the wedding. She had walked into herself. No title, no performance, no apology. She was never the backup plan. She was the destination. And now, the world finally had taken the scenic route to see her clearly. Here's the Bible verse, Luke 8 verse 17 KJV. "For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known and come abroad." Why this verse? This scripture aligns powerfully with Naomi's journey. Though Marcus and others conspired in secrecy, hiding betrayal behind tradition, family politics, and false appearances, everything came to light. Naomi didn't force the truth. She positioned herself, and the truth revealed itself at the appointed time. This verse affirms that no matter how hidden the injustice, God ensures that truth is always unveiled, not to shame, but to set free. Moral of the story: when you carry truth with quiet hands, the day will come when it speaks louder than any lie ever shouted. Expanded, Naomi's strength was not in vengeance, but in her unwavering patience. She didn't confront every insult, nor did she beg for her worth to be seen. Instead, she prepared, documented, and waited until the moment when the truth would no longer be silenced. This story teaches us that dignity is never weakness, and that silence is not surrender. The moral is clear. Even when the world tries to erase your role in the story, God will write you back in, not as a footnote, but as the turning point. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.